Welcome, team, to Metallidium Pages. It's a great pleasure to talk with you about Ne Obliviscaris, this new album, this new album's Exul, and more things related to the metal world. So I think we start with a common question, because this question is, I think a lot of interviews ask you, why the band delayed 6 years to release a new album? That's the first time the band delayed too much to release a new one. So what are the motives? And perhaps the pandemic accelerated the process of composition.
Yeah, so basically, it was like October 2017 that we released our previous album, Earn. And, we came home in 2019, we started writing this album, and we had, some sessions in Australia in like May 2019. But, our last tour was, June 2019. We did some European festivals. We came home. I landed back in Australia on July 1, I remember 2019. And that was when we were, set aside the time to write the new record. And so from there, we had studio time booked in March, April in 2020. And, Dan had recorded drums in Nashville in the USA. He was coming back to Australia on about March 13, 2020. And now, of course, everyone remembers what happened in March 2020. And so we had like the whole band, and our producer, Mark Lewis, was supposed to meet in Australia. Our lead guitarist, Benji, lives in France. Our bassist, Martino, lives in Italy. And so, and our producer, Mark Lewis, is in Nashville in the US. So all of them were supposed to come to Australia in the second half of March to record the album, and then everything got shut down. So, if we had have recorded, just 3 or 4 weeks earlier, the album would have been out second half of 2020, because, we had written the songs, the drums, bass, guitars were all done. The violins and vocals were maybe like 70-80% done when the pandemic hit. But the recording studios all got shut down. And really for the next 2 years, Melbourne ended up being like the #1 most locked down city in the entire world. And the recording studios were shut. And so instead of recording the album in March, April 2020, and it being out in the second half of 2020, instead we recorded the album in 4 different countries in 9 different recording spaces across 2.5 years. And so it was definitely a long, laborious process, but we got there, which is all that matters in the end.
Wow, amazing experience. A lot of things happened during this one, the recording process. A lot, 4 countries, a lot of things happened. So I'm talking about usually the last album for the band is the special one. Well, usually all albums from a band is special because means something in time. As you told me, the experience of this to record this album was amazing. 4 countries, COVID times, etc. For you, which is the exactly meaning, or what does mean this new album for you and the career of Ne Obliviscaris, a band that usually presents a different kind of albums? Because since the beginning to now, Ne Obliviscaris is very difficult to relate with one style.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, with every record, we try to make sure we don't consciously try to do anything particular beyond creating music that we love and making sure that we're challenging ourselves to keep experimenting with new things. And so, we kind of take note of, hey, on the last album or 2, we finished a lot of songs this way, or we've started a lot of songs this way, or we've used this sort of structure or whatever. So we go, let's challenge ourselves to try and see what else we can come up with, like to do things in new ways. And so for this album, I think one of the things for me is that, I was really trying to explore how we can kind of arrange songs in interesting ways, and to also challenge myself vocally, and also with all of the violin and the string elements to use that in different ways. And so the strings on this album are quite different to what we've done in the past. We've shown like elements of this before in songs, but there's songs where there's, you know, distorted violins and acoustic solo violins, but then there's string sections with violins, or there's viola. There's a couple of viola solo sections. You know, there's cellos and a couple of bits, and we've only had just like little bits of that on the last album or two. Whereas on this one, it kind of is there through quite a lot of the record. And so for me, that was a really fun challenge to bring in those elements, because I've always been interested in, and I've always kind of written some of that stuff for strings, you know, being a violinist for, you know, more than 30 years. So just working out how to do that within Ne Obliviscaris's music was a really fun thing. But I mean, in regards to like what this album means, you know, it's really just that that knowledge that back when we started writing this, and when I was writing some of the stuff for this album, late 2019, I had particular things in my imagination where I knew exactly how I wanted it to sound as a finished product. And then it took almost 3 years from that initial idea to actually get it to that final, you know, mixed mastered stage. But it got there, and it was basically exactly what I had had in mind, you know, almost 3 years earlier. And so that faith in the creative process for us, even when it was so long, it really feels like it was rewarded. And I think that gives us a lot of confidence in what we can do and those visions that we have for the songs and the albums overall. So kind of like moving forward, I think I just feel even more confident than ever before in kind of what we're able to do creatively, which is quite exciting.
Well, nice to hear. So, you told me that this album has a lot of more violin, cello, etc. These aspects and more presence in the whole album. I've listened a lot this new album to this interview because I really like the band since the beginning. I remember when the Portal of Eye appears in the world, and you are more extreme at that time, more faster, more technical. So a lot of people told me that this is not that this is very difficult to understand the band at that time, but Citadel was the same, faster, accelerated, but so from Urn to now, the band stays, so the band left the extreme metal parts, like faster, technical, progressive, more this, and you enter more like a progressive metal, but more calm, as you said, more definitions, more textures, more layers into the music, but nor faster or extreme or brutal as you did in the first or second album. So this change was conceived by the new way that you try to do in your music, or perhaps as a method that you have to, that you know to that all the time you say this aspect for the musicians when we are more younger, so that there are more capabilities, you have more techniques, you go into the music, but you will get older, you're like calm people, so soft people, so perhaps this is aspects that's why the Exile is more calm.
All right, so I'll take that in a couple different ways. So one thing I'll say is that when I think back about Portal of Eye, being young musicians, when we were writing that, you know, I loved, like, you know, guitarists like John Petrucci or Jeff Loomis who could just like shred unbelievably, and I kind of like wanted to be like that on the violin. And you know, as a young musician in my 20s, I wanted people to think that I was really good, you know, and I wanted to impress people, not just with writing a good song, but that I could really play my violin like really well, and like up with you know, the top guitar players in metal. And that was, I guess, something that I had in mind. So sometimes, you know, when writing stuff in those early days, you would think like, oh, I want to write a really fast run here because it'll be impressive, you know. Whereas now, so now, like, you know, I'm 40 now. I don't give a shit what people think about technicality and stuff like that. I just want to write great music and great songs. And if it's technical or not, it doesn't matter. So a good example of that is, say, like Misericord Part 2, you know, the beginning of that, it is so simple. And the violin is very subtle, it's very quiet. And it's like the exact opposite of that approach of thinking that technicality is better. But on the other hand, there are also parts on the album that are very technical. I think that what's changed over the time is feeling more comfortable, like within ourselves, and not feeling like we need to shred just for the sake of it. There is some parts on the album that are technical, but it's only if it serves the music. The one thing I would say, though, is I kind of disagree that the band's less extreme. I would just say that we pushed it in both directions. So I would say that if you listen to a song like Suspire, you know, I think that's like one of the heaviest songs we ever done. That probably is comparable maybe to a song like Pyrrhic or Citadel. Like, you know, that's definitely as heavy. And I think the production is actually heavier than like Portal of Eye. The production is actually not that heavy.
Yeah.
It's really good, but it's not the guitars aren't like super heavy sounding. So like if you listen to like And Plague Files, the Kaleidoscope, you know, we just put up the other week the live version from our Live in Melbourne Blu-ray, and that live version sounds heavier than the album version, and that's because it's mixed by what's a live version, and we had that mixed by Mark Lewis, who has produced Exile and Urn. And that, I guess that's the other difference. So the productions really change, and so that changes the way the music is communicated. So I think that that extreme element is definitely still there, but the difference is that what we do when we're not being extreme has really expanded. And so we are more comfortable not just being, say, acoustic in a way that, I mean, I guess we've never done it really the way people would expect. I mean, I think of Forget Not and Plague Files Kaleidoscope, they're not like typical you know, progressive metal songs anyways, but I guess we continue to explore more things, and maybe even to be like a bit prettier sometimes, you know, like with the kind of beautiful strings or really lush sounding things that maybe aren't super common in extreme metal, and then combine that with the extreme element. And so yeah, so it's a little bit the thing of getting more comfortable as we get older, but we're always really conscious of, you know, we like both extremes and we like that balance. And so it's just making sure we go across a record in all of those different directions, and leaning into them in different ways.
That's nice. That's not so. I'm talking about this aspect that the music that the musician feels a lot of things. You said that for this you want to more technicality, more progressive, more younger at that time. But now you're a different point of music to do music. So talking about this subject of living influence, what happens internally and externally of the musician over the years, by day. Many musicians say that they don't have a direction when writing music, as you told me, and carried away by the feelings that they have in the moment. It's normal for all musicians, for all artists in general. So for you, how do the parts of producing an album connect with the idea of the sensation of it? Could we say that the music is a concept thinking, or as a funky thinking? I mean, when you say, so 3 times, 4 times this rip, 4 times the blast beats, etc. Time you use times to do music, but at the same time, perhaps you are as a concept not thinking. You deliver by your own way and your own methods to do music. So perhaps could we say that this aspect is both, or perhaps just one?
Yeah, great question. So I think that what I always try to do as a musician creatively, and you know, when I teach, you know, I teach a lot of violin students and stuff like that, and when I'm talking to people about songwriting, it's always trying to get across this notion that you want to spend as much time as possible practicing your instrument, you know, thinking about songwriting, understanding, like it's really worthwhile to understand the technical aspects, like learning how to read music properly and understanding music theory and chord progressions and all of this sort of stuff, and doing scales and arpeggios and whatever. Like I come from a classical background where that was kind of drilled into me from a young age. But when I write, I don't think about any of that, right? So I practiced for years to know all that stuff back to front. And then when I pick up my instrument, I just try to connect with the music. So if I'm writing a violin solo, I'm not thinking, oh, okay, well, here when we have, you know, this like, you know, D7 diminished chord going through to here, I want to add in the fifth. Like I'm not thinking about that. I'm picking up my instrument and I'm connecting emotionally to the chord progression, and then just intuitively coming up with something that feels right in the moment. And so that thing about the mental, versus say emotional aspect, I think it's important to have the intellectual aspect. Sometimes it can help you solve problems. Maybe if you can't work out how to make two riffs fit together, you might have more tools in your toolkit as a songwriter, as a composer, if you understand things intellectually. But from the same time, there's a lot of music that is really well thought out, but if it doesn't have this, your heart in it, it's boring. And so that's the thing that I think is really important. And so when we're writing, it's always that balance of making sure that the main focus is this music making you feel something from start to finish, and are you taking the listener on an emotional journey? And forget about like whether how many beats in the bar or how many repetitions of this, unless you need that to kind of help reach that goal of the emotional connection.
Mm. Nice, nice. And so, what did your opinion about all discography? Because Ne Obliviscaris is a point in the progressive metal, because you did something like the other people didn't. So that's you are all you Ne Obliviscaris their own sound, their own way to do the music since the beginning to now. So, but you are not afraid to repeat by yourself, because a band like your sound, as unique as you are, is very difficult in some one. It's very difficult to grow in your sound with different new methods, with new schemes. But at the same time, it's not impossible to repeat by yourself with this essence, especially when you use the violin. And I remember since the beginning, the violin was a huge impact into the extreme metal that you did at that time. But now you still doing the same use the violin. Perhaps do you not have afraid to repeat by yourself, and if you mix with other styles, because you are one of a kind band, difficult to understand the scene always. Perhaps you enter to a new wave to development your own music without repeating by yourself.
Yeah, I think that for us, it's always just about trying to create music that we love without thinking too much about how that is going to come out. And so in the early days of the band's career, we were able to develop a sound that is unique just by being ourselves. Like as a metal musician, I'm kind of unusual because I have a classical background. I played a lot of jazz violin, a huge metal fan, for my whole life as well. And it was kind of, putting all of these different things together. And then instead of trying to fit all of that stuff into a box, credit to the guys in the band that, I would write stuff sometimes that wasn't metal at all. And it would be like, hey, that's pretty cool. Let's use that. Or the other way around. I remember like, our guitarist Matt was the one who came up with the initial riff for like the beginning of And Plague Follows a Kaleidoscope off Portal of Eye. And it's this kind of Latin sounding, acoustic guitar part in like, in 5/8. And it was like, hey, let's see if we can turn that into a metal song, because we were just having fun jamming. It's like, I wonder if we can find a point to like bring in the distortion and turn it into a metal song. So we would kind of almost set ourselves these like fun challenges of incorporating stuff that we'd written and just, seeing how that would come across. And, for me, like when the band, first started, which is, 20 years ago now, I was really inspired by bands who were doing things that were a bit different. I really loved, Opeth when they came out with their Blackwater Park album. That was the first thing I'd heard from them. And I'd never heard a metal band have death metal elements, but be really beautiful as well. That was kind of the most beautiful I'd heard a metal band be before. And kind of the same era, when Enslaved came out with their, Isa and Rune albums. And it was almost like mixing Pink Floyd with black metal. And I hadn't heard that before. And these albums were coming out when we were just starting. And so even though I don't think we really sound anything like those bands, but there's that kind of inspiration of these bands are just being themselves, and we wanted to come up with our own way of just being ourselves. And then I think that each album is, you know, unique in its own way. And, you know, because we kind of don't really sound too much like anyone else, it gives us that freedom to really just do whatever we want. And every album has like different genre elements that we haven't done before. And so I would get pretty bored if we just did the same. Like there are a lot of bands who, you know, their genre is this, and it's in a box, and every album is kind of like pretty similar. They might be really good, but I would find that maybe a bit boring creatively. So I feel really fortunate to be in a band with guys that are really open to pushing the boundaries, because I think that's a fun way to compose music.
Well, yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true. If you stay with the past, you never change. A lot of people say, well, especially fans, thinks that the bands stay with the primal sounds, with the first sound, and never change, because I love that kind of music at the beginning. But you speak about those people who expect a different sound of the same thing into this new album, because you said it's normal, you know, like according to a lot of reviewers and fan comments. So who expect that hey, this exul, I hope this will be like the earth, like the second one, the previous. It's normal. So how you define the sound of this new album compared to the previous records, and why do you think there is a certain idea of the fan and that expects the band change direction in their music in every record? Even Ne Obliviscaris did it in the time since the beginning.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I, I mean, this record, it's difficult to describe. I mean, I guess really when I think about this album, you know, I just think about that it's, you know, it's a pretty epic, intense journey across 52 minutes, and it really takes the listener to a lot of different places. I think it really leans very heavily into some of those melodic and progressive elements for an extended period at times. And then kind of when you least expect it, it kind of, you know, slaps you over the head with, you know, some incredibly, you know, heavy riffs and, intense extreme metal drumming. And it's just that balance. I think it's just pushed it in every direction. So I definitely think that there's stuff on this record which is the heaviest sounding stuff we've ever done, and also the most progressive stuff we've ever done on the same record. And in regards to expectations from fans, to be honest, like we really don't think about it that much, and we try not to care at all, because you just can't please everyone. And there's always going to be some fans that say, you know, the first album is the best. Like that's fine. That's great. You know, like it's great that, you know, people love that album. But you know what? In the last week, I've seen comments from people saying, well, like, you know, they'll probably never top Portal of Eye, but this is really cool. You know, I've seen comments from people saying, well, like Citadel is their magnum opus, but maybe this is as good. And then I just read a review yesterday saying, you know, we thought that they wouldn't be able to top Earn, but maybe this one gets there. You know, so everyone, when they're comparing this album, a lot of people use a different album as their comparison for what their favorite album is. And I think that's the interesting thing, that actually, if you did a poll amongst our fan base, there's actually quite a split over which album is people's favorites. But I honestly think that this is the best one we've done. And I think that for a lot of people, this is going to be their new favorite album of ours. And I think that the really cool thing with the new stuff so far is that so many new people are discovering the band that had never heard us before. You know, as soon as we put out Equus in December, the first single, and Graal in January, we were getting so many messages from people who had no idea who we were. And that was really exciting, because of course that's the idea. You want to be growing with each album, while still staying true to yourself and just doing your thing. And that's, I think, the exciting thing with this album, that we just try to do what we do in the best way possible, and a lot of new people are discovering it, and then a lot of the existing fans are really loving it as well, which is really exciting.
Okay, but you said that, well, combining these is answers. Talking about for the people that, well, you said that the people prefer the first two albums, their maximum opus, etc., etc. But curious thing, as a cliche, the band thinks, as you say, this is your preferred one or the best effort to date. But as you're a fine musician in jazz, metal, you love your influence, Black Sabbath, classic music, Tchaikovsky, etc. A lot of music. But if you sit in the foot of the as a fan of musician, so that you think like them for your principal influence. So from jazz, metal, rock, you say that the first albums for that artist that influence you are the best works to date. So what is your opinion about this aspect as a fan of the music too, but at the same time you're a musician, so you have a different opinion from your principal influence, but at the same time you say that this album is your best effort to date, or perhaps you have a special one that no one knows into the career of Ne Obliviscaris.
I mean, I think that the most important thing as a musician is just to be true to yourself, and then the influences really always just come out kind of innately. So, there's, of course, artists who have influenced each of us in particular ways, but at the same time, there's so much, there's so much that comes into, like, the reality of who I am as a musician is a combination of hundreds of influences from so many different genres, and a little bit from so many different places that go into who you are, and then combined with just the other band members. I've obviously been quite influenced by the other guys that I play with, and then what they do, and we kind of learn and grow together, as a unit. And then I think that, as a fan of music, obviously, you look at the artists and you want them to do whatever you like, the songs that you like the most, or the album that you like the most, you want more of that. Whereas obviously, in the band, the most important thing is just being true to who we are creatively. And so I think it's just that separation of those things, and just trying to make sure that we're always just true to ourselves with our own creative vision, kind of regardless of anything else.
Okay. Other last point, Bernard, talking about now again from this new album. Yeah, you know that the new ways of hearing music is just spread this music just by singles at this time. We are back in time in the 40s and 50s, that when the music at that time was spread by singles. Also Elvis Presley, Beatles did just singles, and they're famous now. But now we are returning to this aspect, and a lot of labels do this aspect to promote just the bands and singles, and 3 months later promote the whole album, or perhaps not, or an EP, who knows. So in a world that is continue growing with these singles aspects, so which single or which songs for you represent represent whole sensations, whole layers, whole textures that this Exul has for the listeners, because these songs will put perhaps in so many playlists for you. Which song represent all these S's? I know it's very difficult, because as you told me, you are 40, more than 40, so you prefer to hear all albums. So that's the way that you hear. But the people, I'm 43 too, so I understand the music like this way. But I'm talking about the people, so 35, 30, or 20 years, they love to do the playlist in all digital platforms. So if we relate these aspects, so which songs for you capture whole essence from this Exul? Is possible?
Yeah, I mean, it's not possible to, I mean, obviously get everything from the album into the one song, because we go to too many places. But I mean, the reason why we released Equas, the opening track, as the first single, was because we felt it had that balance. It's a 12.5-minute song that has, lots of heavy bits, but it also has all those progressive elements, and it had a kind of a structure that we felt, when we kind of wrote it, I kind of felt that it kind of had a little bit of a similarity to this, to our song, like Devour Me Colossus from Citadel, just in regards to the way that the song flowed, even though like the actual bits and pieces are quite different. And that's, a very popular song of ours amongst fans. And so we kind of felt that like that was the one that would maybe have the broadest appeal. And so yeah, I mean that's done really well as far as it being on a lot of Spotify playlists and stuff like that, which has really helped the band. And so it's always that balance of trying to find something that fits into that way of doing things so that you can make sure as many people hear your music as possible, whilst at the same time explain to people that, hey, this is intended to be listened to start to finish. And so if you hear a single and you like that, or if you see a song on a playlist and it is interesting to you, well, make sure you go back and you listen to the whole record, because that's the real experience. And then if you like that, make sure you come to a show, because that's even better, I think, to be able to experience the music in that live format.
Okay. Well, nice. So talking about other aspects about, well, I love your band because I'm really curious about everything about your band. So when I saw for the first time Portal of I remember that the first impression that I got from the cover art was amazing. Then I read the lyrics, especially I didn't one lyric that captured my attention, just the name Xenoflux, amazing name for a song. I tried to relate for the mythological aspect. A lot of well, I read, but always the band present this difficult or this a lot of textures into the covers. A lot of things happens into the covers with the lyrics too, because in the second album, Citadel, like names like Pyrrhic, like Triptychs, Locks. This is this is unusual names for a metal band, because the usual names is Death, Grape, Darkness, Black. This is kind of a stuff, or Satan for them. But you always use difficult names to remember, for a well, not to remember, because I remember very well these kind of songs, because it's so special, the names that you remember the first time. So Eerie, one name from the third album, Saturnine Spheres, the third album, and now you said Ecus. It's this is the first time that I hear a band and metal song that called here Ecus. So then Suspires. So why the band always deliver this kind of difficult names to? Well, perhaps you said, perhaps I said it. So perhaps more easily to remember. But perhaps you have other focus to connect the cover arts, the title tracks, the mythological aspects, etc.
Yeah, so all the credit for the album titles, the song titles, the lyrics, and the artwork as well is all the domain of our vocalist Zen. He has a wonderful way with the English language of using words sometimes that are very unusual or uncommon, and sometimes even making up words that are combinations of two different words to make it to have an implied meaning. It's funny with this stuff because often because the music is always written first, and then Zen works on the lyrical themes. And so he will say, hey, I have this is kind of the theme for this song. This is what I'm thinking about for the song title. And then he'll go away on working the lyrics, and he'll come back. And he writes my lyrics as well for my vocal parts. I write the melodies. I will send him, hey, here's the vocal melody, and I'll send it to him like without lyrics. And then he will kind of write something, and we'll kind of work back and forth to make sure it fits what I want to sing. But the interesting thing is that often he's sending me through your lyrics or song titles, and I'm going to like Google dictionary. What is that word? I don't even know the word, So, I had actually like Anhedonia, like the last track on the record, I had never heard that word before.
Me too.
But I was like, well, I looked it up, and it was like, oh, okay, it means that it's, like not able to find enjoyment or pleasure from like the things that you normally would enjoy in life. And so, you know, I feel like I get like a education in this band just by hanging out with Zen because his understanding of the English language is really wonderful. And I think it adds an extra layer to the band artistically,
Yeah, yeah.
that is really interesting. And because every aspect of the band, there's a lot of thought that goes into it, the artwork and to the lyrics and the vocals and the violin and the drums and the guitars and the bass and every element we were really thinking about at a really deep level. And hopefully that's one of the reasons why the end product comes across hopefully really well to the listener.
Okay, so we are very close to this interview, Tim. And for this aspect, what are the future plans that the band has for this new album? Perhaps you will prepare more European tours, perhaps North American tour, or who knows, your first tour here in Latin America. Because I think this band is one of the most requested band that some people ask about. When Obliviscaris plays in Latin America? When a full tour here? I know it's very difficult from Australia because, as you told me, Dan is in US, you are in Australia, orders in Europe. It's very difficult to gather all band, but who knows? It's possible with this new album.
Yes, so we're doing Europe, the UK this May. We're going to be doing US and Canada October, November. We're going to be doing Australia in second half of the year. We haven't announced, or we're announcing that pretty soon. And then after that, the plan is to do headline tour through Asia and to finally do headline tour through Latin America as well. So we've been to Mexico before, but that's the only place we've been to, through Latin America. And we would love to get as many places as possible. I manage a couple of different bands, including a Persephone, who were just on a Latin American tour, which I organized for them. And so obviously getting a bit more connected through that part of the world, and already starting to have discussions about that. So hopefully like first half of next year is the plan to try and do that as well. Because really, we love playing live and we just kind of want to go everywhere. And if people say, hey, come here, then we try to make it happen if we can. And the great thing with the interest in the new album Exile is that obviously as the band gets a bit bigger, it makes it a bit easier to afford something like traveling across to different places to tour that maybe we hadn't in the past because maybe we were going to lose too much money. And so that will be one of the exciting things, just to be able to get back on the road, be able to connect with different people, and to get to some places that we've never been before as well.
Okay. Well, you told me that you will that you play in Mexico. Well, you play here in Mexico. So for that aspect, so what is your memories from the last tours in Mexico? Which moments was more impressive for you, from the audience, for the public, all everything?
Yeah. Okay. So Mexico. So we love Mexico, right? When I think number one memory, I think about that we played in 2018, I guess maybe September, October. I think it was September 2018. We had a US tour booked with Wintersun, and we managed to do a tour with Mexico, a headline tour in Mexico, like the week before that tour started. So we kind of came a week early, went to Mexico on the way. And I remember at our show in Mexico City, we had a sold out show there. It was maybe about like 400 people like crammed into this small club. And we were going out onto stage to, set up our gear before the show. The show's going to start in like 20-30 minutes. And I'm just going on stage to like check my violin pedal and stuff like that. And I just walked on stage to, check that things were working okay. The show hasn't even started yet. And the crowd, it was like one of the loudest crowds I've ever heard. It was like as if their favorite song had just finished, and the crowd just went crazy. And the show hadn't even started yet. And I remember walking off stage and going, like, wow, this is going to be fun. Because we knew that like the crowd already had decided that this is going to be fun. Like they were already in that frame of mind. They were really excited, looking forward to it. And so it was just really crazy, excited crowd, which was great. And it's always just so much fun to play anywhere where people are passionate about your music, and that was definitely our experience anytime we played in Mexico. So it's definitely one of those places that we're super excited to get back. Like I said, hopefully first half of the next year is the plan.
Great, great. I will be there. So I think one of the two last questions that I have for this interview. Well, no, for a curious thing, I read a lot of reviews from the band. Who came? I think this question was did in English for a lot of interviews in the past, but I think this is the first time that with this interview will translate completely in Spanish. I will transcribe this interview in Spanish. So for that, who came with the idea of mixing violin and metal in Ne Obliviscaris at the first time? You, Sendothir, because you are.
So basically, Zen back in 2003, Zen was starting up a band, and he was starting up a band, and there was like an online like metal forum, and I remember someone posted, and they were kind of looking for like a cellist or something or whatever, and I kind of posted in the comments like mentioning that I played the violin, and Zen saw that comment, and he kind of sent me like a DM saying like, hey, I just like noticed that like you mentioned that you play the violin, like I'm starting a band, like would you be interested in coming having a jam? And told me a little bit about like what they had in mind. And at that time, there really wasn't much violin in metal at all. Like I had heard, my main inspiration at that time was more, say, Apocalyptica, playing cello, in metal. Like just really a couple of years before that, they put out an album.
Or my and the 90s.
Yeah, and they put out an album that was their original stuff with distorted cello, and that was kind of the first time I'd heard distortion on like a string instrument. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. And I liked the idea of doing that for violin. And there was a band, Tristania, and there was a song or an album of theirs called Beyond the Veil. They had a violinist guest on a few songs on that album. And there's a song on that called Angina. There's a really a cool violin solo. And I learned that solo just for fun, right? And so when, and that was one of the only things I'd ever heard. I remember there was a little bit of solo violin on a Nightwish record about 2001. There wasn't much though,
Yeah.
But when I came along to this rehearsal with Zen, and I played this violin solo from this Tristania song, and he knew the song, and we kind of bonded over that. We had this obscure taste in stuff that, a lot of people didn't know, especially when it came to this classical influence in metal. So really, I guess it was, I was always a huge metal fan, and I love playing the violin, and I was interested in the idea, but I didn't really think too hard that playing violin in a metal band was something serious to pursue, because there was no one to copy, so I really credit like Zen for him kind of reaching out and saying, hey, like we think of violin in our band would be cool. Like, do you want to come and have a jam and see if we vibe? So it's really just that, I guess, chance of kind of him and I kind of running into each other like on the internet, and then really bonding musically. And 20 years later, like, we're the two founding members, from that original 2003 lineup, and we're still here, which is pretty,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yes, 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 yes. All I remember when you appear when you first album, a lot of people say that, oh yeah, they use violin and the first album with extreme metal. Remember that a lot of people try to compare the gothic style with the Euro. I remember one label that some reviewer puts extreme gothic progressive metal. I say, wow, for the violin, just gothic. Wow, amazing. Well, that's you remember the gothic confusion in the 90s, my name right, but all the Paris Lost, this kind of so a lot of
Yes.
confusion there. So that's the way, the American media used related the violin always the gothic stuff. I don't know why, but they related it. So the second question before we finish is talking about now from the Australian scene. I remember since the 90s, especially for three bands, especially for the bands. Oh, more than three bands, because I remember into the death metal, Alarum, it's more experimental, progressive, it's all a very difficult band to understand. The first album's amazing, the Fluid Motion. I remember the band. Then the other band that's very difficult to attach with one style is Alchemist. Alchemist is wow. You hear four albums is very difficult. Then then the other bands, Ne Obliviscaris is very difficult to understand. And then there's always the band like Berserker, like the Amenta, or industrial scene. Always, and I think one of the biggest aspects into the doom scene is the disembowelment. They put violin in the old album, grindcore, funeral doom. So I try to relate these aspects because all the bands from Australia since the 90s to now, but you are the one of the last great expressions of Australia, always did the things so special, so different than
Yeah.
Europe, so different than South America, more savage here, or Latin America, more savage. In Europe, in Europe's US, technical, melodic, but you are more experimental, progressive, technical since the 90s. So how can you relate this aspect into the society? Also, which are for you the main elements that the bands like you, Alchemist, Alarum, Diamenta, Disinvolvement, always do the music very different than the whole world.
Yeah, it's a great observation. Look, I mean, I think that this is something that you know, I think is really an interesting thing when you look at the bands you're talking about, they were kind of the big bands in the Australian metal scene when we first started. Alarum's Eventuality album, like their second record, is just unbelievable. I love that album. And when we first started as a band, we were often out at their shows or like hassling those guys that we wanted to open up for them and things like that. Because a lot of us are like really big fans of Alarm. Alchemist, wonderful band as well, really interesting, doing something that's just very unique. And like you mentioned, then there's a whole bunch of bands just doing their own thing. I think part of that is that, like back at that time, right, these bands that were starting, we started in 2003, that most of those bands you kind of mentioned started a few years before us, like maybe in the late 90s. And all of those bands, like at that time, the internet was pretty new and no one came to Australia to tour, really. Like metal bands didn't come much. I remember in the early 2000s, I remember there was like one year where I don't know what, it was like maybe 2001 or two. And like literally there was like three metal bands that toured to Australia for the whole year. It was like Soulfly and Hatebreed and like one other. And that was it. Like for like the whole year, there was like, that's it. If you're a metal fan in Australia, like that no one really came here yet. And so over time, slowly that changed. And now, most bands come to Australia once they get to a certain level. Like the smaller bands find it hard to get here, but anyone who's like pretty well known in the metal scene, they come here every 2 or 3 years or something like that. Now, but back in that time, like our scene was kind of separate to the rest of the world. So, when you had local scenes that were just like overrun with like everyone being a metalcore band, trying to copy Killswitch Engage, which was like the early 2000s, right? you had an element of that in Australia, but you also had this element of just people doing their own thing because we weren't connected to those big scenes in the US or the big scenes in Europe. Our scene was pretty small. And I think that when you have these like little pockets, you're more likely for people not to get sucked into what everyone else is doing because there aren't as many people to copy in your local scene. So you have to work it out for yourself. And when you think for yourself as a musician, you're more likely to come up with something that's an expression of who you are instead of trying to copy everyone else. And I think the interesting thing with the Australian scene now is that I think it's the best in the whole world. I mean, it's insane how many great bands we have coming from Australia. And the crazy thing is that, like we have a lot of the best and the biggest metalcore bands in the world here now. And also from the progressive metal scene, we have the progressive rock scene, like Carnival and Voyager and Caligula's Horse and Pliny. And, I mean, it's like a 12-foot ninja. There's like so many artists on that progressive side, as well as, all these great metal bands on the more extreme side, like say Psychroptic or Bellacore or some of the bands you mentioned as well. And so there's just, such a really wonderful array of like music on the heavier side of things, here in Australia. And, we've kind of got our own little thing, which I think is, a really beautiful and special part. And I think it is kind of this, that we're in our own little corner of the world, which is, I guess it's worked out, I think, pretty well for us.
Yeah, but among all those bands that I mentioned, it's very difficult. This is not the same. 6 bands that I mentioned, it's not the same. Always do it by yourself. It's very difficult. So, well, team, the sad times arrive at this interview. I hope you enjoyed this one like me. You are a terrific guy. I hope someday we'll see Ne Obliviscaris live. I hope, as you said, the next week, the next month, no, the next year, you will come to Latin America, a full tour Latin America. I hope I will see I will see there. If not, I will travel to Europe, not because COVID ended, I think, a year ago, so it's now possible to travel. Perhaps do you want to add something to your Latin American fans that expect next year, as you told me, and a half a year next year to come here to Latin America and Metalerium followers?
Well, just thank you everyone for your patience. It's obviously taken us a long time to get this album out. It's taken us a long time to get back to Latin America or to some places, or, a bunch of places that we haven't been yet. But we really appreciate the support, and we do read messages. We see comments. When people send us messages on social media, what do we see them? We read them. And so we are taking note and making sure that we get to you as quickly as we can. And just, thank you everyone for the support.